Okay, so now I hope you can see the slides. Just go to the presentation notes. Yeah, so probably you remember me from the previous lecture, someday on October, something like this. Oh, first. And this one will be the last one or no? Oh, it's the first one and the last one. Uh, yeah, so you probably more or less know me. So I'm S Ramanauskaite. And basically today I will be talking more about the structure of research article, because usually you as the researchers will be evaluated based on your articles. Like sometimes, yes, there will be some other criteria like projects, teaching, and so on. But like as a scientist, your main outcome usually is articles and so on. So this is why it's important to know the basics, like what should be taken into account and so on. So today I will try to structureize in the following way, like first of all, how to prepare for the article writing, because you shouldn't be starting directly from it. You need to do some kind of steps. Then what is the usually the common structure? So some kind of framework usage helps because you can mimic what already exists. And also a short section about article text, like how to write it, what kind of writing peculiarities exist, just to make sure it aligns with some kind of a standards, let's call it, but not exactly. And as I mentioned, because I'm partly from the education part, like e-learning, I usually have some kind of outcomes which I expect. So from this lecture, what I expect you to gain, you should be understanding the requirements for scientific papers, like understand the main content. So this one probably it's feasible to achieve, and those two probably is not very good selected, because I will be talking, but I do not have some ways how to evaluate it. So my recommendation would be after the lecture, when you will have time, just do some kind of exercise by yourself. Like try to apply the IMRAD framework, write something and see does it match or no. And also try to do some kind of a paper reviews, because it helps to evaluate, do you understand? Because if you will be applying what you learned, you will in the review you will be using it to justify why the paper is suitable, why it's not, and things like this. So as I mentioned, the first part, like planning of the article. So in theory, there are multiple types of articles. So case study, theoretical or conceptual paper, policy paper, data paper, and so on. All of them might be like as a research scientific papers, but usually the two main ones are research article and review article. So basically one is more like literature analysis, and those like review articles are kind of a good from the perspective of citation. Because when you are writing a paper, or even when you are writing PhD thesis, you are analyzing what exists. So when you are analyzing, what kind of a papers you are selecting, those who matches your topic. So if you will be writing a review article, review paper, you will have more matching topics. Like you will be able to use more knowledge from the article rather than selecting very specific, very narrow, and so on. So usually what's happening, those review papers are more cited rather than some kind of research articles. But also it depends on the topic, on authors, different things. But one of the recommendation is, if you are trying to increase your H index and things like this, it makes sense from time to time to write review papers, just to make sure you have some kind of a knowledge, like some base for referencing and so on. My recommendation usually for PhD students is try to write a review paper during the first year. Because what you are doing now, like for the PhD thesis, probably reading multiple articles and trying to understand what's already done in your area. So you could do it and at the same time try to structurize it, like to understand what is happening, what are the topics, what are the tendencies, and so on. So from all the gathered information, you will put it in the PhD thesis. And at the same time, you could get an output like a review paper. Some committees are saying review article is not counted as scientific article and you still need two research papers, but actually it counts. Just you should be like, it should be connected to your PhD thesis. It should be related, not just like you are doing review on one topic and later your PhD thesis is on completely another topic. Yeah, but like while you are doing the related work analysis, you could be synthesizing, summarizing everything and prepare some kind of a article as well as a review paper. And there are some kind of recommendations. I won't be talking it further if I remember correctly, but if you are doing review paper, don't do just text, text, text. If it's a review, automatically everyone expects you will be structurizing the knowledge in the area. So it means you should be using either tables, but not with a long text, but with a short one, and presenting maybe what's the quality, I don't know, what kind of a metrics methods or something like this. Or you should be using, I don't know, some kind of a visualizations, maps, how it could be clustered and so on. One of the approach, because most of the articles will be asking novelty from you. So how with review article you could demonstrate novelty? Any ideas? Because you are just analyzing what's already existing. So how come it's novel? Hmm? Yeah, it could be. But sometimes, like when you will be finding gap, what you will be doing with it? Just will highlight. So if you want to be sure, like you clearly demonstrated this is a gap and this is my novelty, because finding just a gap sometimes could be a contribution, but it might be like, maybe it's not enough, like they could be picky. You could use some kind of I call it either taxonomy or classification. For example, you will do some structure demonstrating those properties exist for classifying existing research, and no one was mentioning this one. So it will be the same, like finding gap. No one was investigating this topic, and I know it's relevant. So adding some visualization usually helps for the reader to understand, like, this element is missing and I added it, rather than just writing in the text. And probably finding gap will be just one paragraph among, I don't know, 100 paragraphs. So it might be lost. If there will be some highlights in a table, in visualization, it might be easier for the reviewer, for the reader to spot it. But it's just some small things. Like usually I call it cheating, because when you are writing papers, sometimes you already know like what works and what doesn't. So adding some kind of such a small things might be useful. Yeah, and coming back to it, so why we are writing papers? So I listed in this case 8 reasons, and on the left I call it bad reasons, and on the right I call it correct reasons. Why I'm calling bad and correct? So usually those 3 are the most common. Like you are writing paper not just because you want to share, you are writing because someone told, like for PhD thesis you must write articles. Or for example, so one is, for example, career development. Like in university, your career depends on how productive you are in research. So automatically, how they are counting it, not what you invented, but how many papers you wrote. Or fulfilling obligations. So like for PhD thesis, you need to write, or building credibility, like building your image. So those are more pragmatic, like I need to do it, so this is why I will be writing. But every time when I'm writing a new article, I'm opening, not every time, but sometimes, this slide, I'm just looking what should be the correct reason. So advancing knowledge, solving problems, fostering transparency, educating and inspiring others, and ethical responsibility. So those help me to understand what should be the real reason. I should be sharing what I did. I should be sharing the knowledge, or I should be presenting how I solved the existing problem to make sure others will use it, not just reinvent it. So this list helps me to understand how I should be writing. If my purpose is to explain, for example, some kind of a problem existed and I solved it, and to explain how I solved it. So it means I should be detailed enough to explain what kind of a data I used, what kind of a methods, how I processed it, what results I received, so that the reader would understand what it means. If my purpose is just to write an article because university counts it, so then I'm not thinking about the end user. I'm just, oh, I need to write it. So what I have, I will put everything. I will use some Gen AI tools to generate. So does it mean it's a good and useful paper? Not necessary. So this one helps me to remember why I should be doing, and it affects how I'm writing. And usually the main structure of research articles is, in the beginning, you should have the research question. So the research question, some papers, journals automatically will ask you to identify what research questions you are raising and how you are solving it later, because those are connected. Usually research questions will be in the introduction and answers, conclusions will be in the end. And in the middle, you will fill everything, what you did and so on. So this research question not necessarily will be question, it can be also an objective, what you are seeking with the research, what kind of a problem you are solving. So basically it should answer, is it interesting to the reader? And how we estimate, is it interesting? It should be new. So something new should be presented, not just repeating what already exists. It should be relevant and timely. So relevant, so usually we can define it also. Those terms are kind of closely related. So timely, like now it's important, not just because there are sometimes some situations, just assume you did the related work analysis and all your references are 20 years old. There is nothing new during the 10 years, last 10 years. So is it a relevant topic or no? Probably no. Probably the problem is already solved, or it's non-solvable, something like this. So even the list of references indicate, like, is the topic really relevant? But not always. Maybe you selected the problem which was forgotten, and now you are using completely different approach, different technologies and so on. And now you were able to solve it or to achieve better results and something like this. So it might happen, but probably also in the research question, you will identify it, highlighting why it has a new aspect and so on. And finally, in the end, in the answers and conclusions, so basically you will need to answer, is it compelling? So basically, is it trusted? Is it new? Like those, as I mentioned, will be connected. There you raise some questions, there you should be answering it and providing evidence. So yeah, how it affects the writing. So basically the checklist and those items are more or less the same. So you should be writing clearly and consistently, because you know someone will be reading and the person should be understanding and getting new knowledge and so on and so on. Provide comprehensive methodological details. So to make sure the experiment is repeatable, so I can achieve the same results by repeating it, not just like I'm reading the basics and a lot of it's hidden from me. Yeah, also you should be transparent. Do not hide some details, and at the same time admit the existing limitations, because how you will be evaluated based on the article value as well as on your competence. So you can illustrate your competences by admitting limitations, doing deeper analysis rather than just listing the results and things like this. And also take into account the existing ethical standards, result are reproducible and things like this. So as I mentioned, like those usually are coming from the fact when you understand why you are writing, what should be the correct reason behind it and so on. And there are some sources, I added one here and one is here, so I prefer this one a little bit more, but I won't go into details, just to illustrate, like you can find some sources which will guide you and will present some kind of recommendations, what could be done. So for example, probably the most important part of your articles, there are several of those. One is abstract, because based on abstract, someone will be reading your article or won't, because usually you are screening by just looking into the abstract. And even if there is a full article, usually people are looking into the introduction and into the conclusions, sometimes into the list of references, because as I mentioned, it might reflect how up to date the topic is and things like this. So this is why introduction usually is highlighted as one of the most important elements, because in the introduction, you should provide what is the purpose of the research, what is the message. So usually the message is the research questions or the objective of the research, because you shouldn't be doing just research of the because of the research. And it's tricky with the objective, so it applies both for the paper as well for the, for example, PhD thesis. Like, what should be the objective of the PhD thesis? If I will write, my objective is to do a research about how vulnerable Vilnius Tech University students are to phishing attack. Is it a good objective or no for article or PhD thesis? I know. Okay, if I will add to do a research estimating, what could I estimate? Okay, we did one research on estimating the time frame between the phishing email reception and reaction, which wasn't investigated before, and it's relevant because it's important how fast the help desk should react. Yeah, so in this case, I agree with you. And as I mentioned, those small things, how I evaluate objective. Objective should have two properties. One is measurable. So if my research is to do research, to investigate, how will I measure is it achieved or no? If I just investigated 3 papers, I already investigated, I already analyzed, so it's achieved? No. So how to measure? So there should be some kind of a metric which could prove, for example, if I go here, if I had the research question, later I should be answering, so I need to measure to evaluate, is it done or no? And another, it should be change. Like, for example, so basically for me, objective is a main verb, increase. So with increase, I automatically accept what? Increase accuracy. So then I know I will measure accuracy. If I'm increasing, so probably either I will be looking what's now and what I achieved with my new proposal, or what's already existing in the related work and what I'm proposing. So automatically it will be something new because I changed the situation. And it will be measurable because I increased, decreased, or I don't know. So sometimes it's tricky because, for example, if you just were investigating how, I don't know, age affects the credulity to phishing attacks. So it's a new knowledge. You did a different experiment, something new, and so on. So what was your objective? So to increase understanding about, so increased understanding also becomes complicated because it means then you should be estimating, so what was the knowledge before and what will be after. But it's a very good exercise just to structureize your research. Can I measure? Can I prove? And is it some kind of a shift? So is it some kind of a novelty? So if it's possible, try to use those keywords like reduce the workload, like increase the accuracy or some kind of another metric. So this is why the purpose, as I mentioned, those two are kind of important. And sometimes it's like doing to do research on blah, 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 means I'm doing research with the purpose to do research. So it's something with as those bad reasons, like I'm just writing paper to write a paper, not to share the knowledge or to gain some new knowledge. So this is why also when you have a research question, it helps, like I need to answer, does credulity depend on age? So this is my new knowledge. I found it out, is there any relationship? And in this case, it's also measurable because, for example, I will be estimating, is it statistically different, significant difference or no? So message is exactly about this, because then you are saying what exactly you will be doing, what you will be trying to achieve. And with audience, it's more complicated. Like usually all research papers have a common audience like scientists, academia, but sometimes it might be very specific. For example, Even in computer science, some students are doing analysis of, I don't know, medical images. So sometimes they are publishing in computer science journals, sometimes in medicine journals. So automatically, because of the areas, there might be some different practices, how the article should be written and so on. So this is why it's saying like take into account what's your audience, basically what the journal expects from you. Also, some other advices, for example, improving your writing, what could help, like doing kinds of writing like exploratory or explanatory strategies of writing. So just doing some, and also, as I mentioned, like some kind of a structure helps. So using the approach, like I have a big idea, then I'm implementing it, and then I'm getting outcomes, also helps. You shouldn't be starting from the results. I did the research and achieved those metrics, and this is how I achieved. Like usually, no, you are explaining step by step. Also, like how to submit. We discussed with Lithuanian students, like, should I write a paper and then look for appropriate journal, or should I find the journal and then write a paper? What's better? Okay, you have the same opinion as they. But also what was tricky when I'm saying what's better, based on what? Probably on better matching. Yeah. If I will find a journal, I will mimic the structures, the text, like I will know, yeah, it's suitable for this one, and I can match all the requirements. In theory, but more in theory, like if you are writing paper with a clear objective to spread the news, your research results, and so on, it shouldn't be so important to which journal I'm sending if it's relevant. I'm just writing and it should fit to all, but in practice, no. It's a good idea to find a journal and to read papers which already exist. And I will be talking about it a little bit later, but one of the recommendations is if you select a journal, just review existing papers and find similar ones and add it in your paper as references. Why it has value? One value is you will demonstrate the editor your article is not out of scope. It's related to the journal. They already published something similar. So because sometimes in the beginning you are getting like out of scope with no review, just like we don't believe your article is suitable for our journal. It's not the same topic. So by referencing, you will show you have similar articles. Mine is similar, so you should be reviewing. And another research paper journals now becomes more like a business because either you are paying for article processing charge, or you are giving them right to sell your paper. So sometimes it will be like free of charge for you, but everyone who will be willing to view your paper will need to pay some kind of, to have a subscription or pay to get access to your paper. So this is why the editor sometimes are counting like, okay, you add a reference to our journal, so it will increase our citation, so it could lead to better performance and so on and so on. So it's a small thing. It's not necessary to do, but sometimes it helps. So I was showing this one and this one just to illustrate. Sometimes you will find some kind of advice as what works, what doesn't, but it depends on each areas, and with experience you will see what works for you, what doesn't. And talking about the main plan, so usually, yeah, probably it makes sense to start from the research question, just to make sure even before doing the experiment, you clearly know what you are trying to achieve, what will be, as I mentioned, measurable and different, novel, like the increase or something, and automatically based on it, you will be building all the research and the paper as well. Then you should be at the same time, even before writing and sometimes even before doing the experiments, highlighting the importance, because in the introduction, usually you need to say what's the importance, what's the novelty, relevance to the topic, and things like this. So before doing, sometimes it's very small, very unique, but just important, as you mentioned, to find the gap and to highlight like, yes, this is my area, what I will be doing. And yeah, if it's necessary, sometimes even after the research, based on the results, you can tune up the research questions and so on. So a clear structure later helps when you are writing the paper. Also defines the initial title and authors. So title, why it's very relevant, because when you are searching for papers, probably you are searching based on the title, or when you are selecting what to read and what not to read. And also there are some recommendations how to order the authors. So for example, you wrote the paper, should you write your supervisor or no? It depends how much you were collaborating. If it was only you, it's one question. If you were collaborating and so on, so yeah, probably you should be listing all of the contributors, but it becomes tricky. For example, there are some papers, especially in physics, they are writing each person who at least a little bit contributed. And in physics experiments, there are a lot of technical persons. So there are some cases when now I don't remember the numbers, but basically it was like the list of authors was much, much longer than the article itself. So they were listing all of them. So it's tricky and it depends on each area. But usually the recommendation is you are starting from the most contributing person to the least contributing. And usually what happens, like the PhD student is the first author and the supervisor is the last author. Why? Because usually it depends, as I mentioned, it's not a rule. But like usually the supervisor is the person who is telling you like you should try this one, that one, but he is not writing the paper. He's not doing the experiment. He's just guiding you and probably in the end just reviewing, adjusting it and so on. But if you will use the idea like from the most contributing to the least contributing, it will help more. Because why it's important to know the order? Because what's the difference? Am I the first one, second one, or the last one? When you are referencing, and there are more authors than 6, if I remember correctly, you are mentioning the first author at all. And no one knows who is the last, second one, third one, and so on. So sometimes it affects how visible you are, and so on and so on. Another, yeah, like, and also why I'm mentioning it here, if there are multiple authors, for example, if you will decide, oh, 5 PhD students are writing one article together, it's a little bit tricky because when you will be defending the PhD thesis, only one of the students will be able to use it like it's my contribution. It cannot be like 5 PhD students writing always together and they all are saying like, oh, I have 5 articles, I have 5 articles, so it's important to take into account this one. And also what I wanted to see here, yeah, like if you are writing together, listing, if you will admit like it's based on the contribution, you will be like doing some kind of agreement. Like if you are the second author, you should be contributing more. Like you should do more or less the same as the first author, maybe a little bit more than the third one, and so on and so on. So creating outline also helps because you have an initial structure and you are just filling it rather than, I don't know, trying to write in parallels and combining everything together. Then the style might be different. It could be some repetitions and so on. Also, take into account, probably you will need to edit it multiple times. It's like it says here, like write, rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. Also, it's a good recommendation to include tables, figures in the initial planning because it will help you to understand you need to add some kind of a visualization, as I mentioned, because just reading text is not so powerful like seeing some graph results. Because one of the journal editors, it wasn't very prestigious journal, but he was guiding the reviewers. And one of the recommendation was, if the article has no formula or chart, it should be rejected automatically. Because the assumption was if you are providing formula, so it means you are doing some calculations, new probably formulas and so on. If you are adding charts, so probably you did some research and presenting the results. If there is just text, so probably just case analysis and there is nothing new, something like this. And also, before submitting, it's a good idea to review it, just to revise it and to do also some kind of a checklist, because most of the journals have a checklist. What should be added, what should be included, what's the formatting. Sometimes even if you are not matching the formatting, or if the length of the article is too long, too short, you can be rejected without even reading. And one more thing, talking about this one, because in the end I didn't mention the Lithuanian students, and they were asking like, expectation is you will do research, you will write a paper, you will submit it, and then you will start another research. No. Usually you start research, then while you are writing paper, you are starting another research. After you submitted, you are still like submitting another, because in most of the cases, the review process will take at least half a year. So if you will wait until you will get the review, until it will be published, you will be waiting for about 1 year. So what you will be doing during this time? Nothing? No, you should be continuing and planning other research, other articles, because there are some cases, for example, once I was waiting 1.5 years for the review. And we were discussing sometimes the topic is already not relevant, not timely. It was outdated, but yeah, only then you got the review. So if I will wait, it won't be a good idea. And sometimes even, for example, after half a year, you will get a reject. So you will need to submit it, or to usually the recommendation is to improve it, then just to submit it somewhere else. But the idea is like you shouldn't be waiting. You should be always producing new results if you want to be on time with a PhD thesis and something like this. Yeah, now talking about another thing about the title of the article. So also different journals have different recommendations, but general recommendations would be use a short title, up to 15 words, to make sure it won't be half of the page just for the title. Because in most of the cases, your publication will be found by search engines, and now they are using semantic analysis, but in most of the cases, previously at least, it was more based on the text matching. So, and it's usually are looking into your title and abstract. So this is why it's important to use relevant keywords. Like if in your area some kind of a terminology is used, so yeah, it makes sense to mimic it and include it in your title as well. Also, because as I mentioned, it becomes more or less business, because some researchers even counting what's the H index, like citation index and so on. So your title of the article also should be attention grabbing, like to make sure it's interesting to read. If you will see like some paper which title is, I don't know, research with Lithuanian students. Do you want to read it? You do not know what is it about and so on. If you will do some kind of a more catching approach, like, and sometimes even I see the article title sometimes is a question. So is it possible to fight against Gen AI? And then they, after the column, they are adding some kind of explanation, like, I don't know, research on something. So one of the recommendation, it's not necessarily correct, but there was one article they analyzed what's the impact of using colon and not using. And they were spotting like those articles which were using colon were more cited than those who wasn't. And the idea is with the colon, then you have like two parts. With one part, you can be more general or more catchy, more social media, similar approach could be applied. And after the column or before, it depends, like in your case, you could be more specific, explaining your specific area. If you will use just your specific area, probably the keywords will be a little bit different and you won't be found in the search. If you will use like more global approach and then specifying or something attention grabbing, which will force the person to read it, and then your specific area, then there will be a better chance for being noticed, so probably even being cited and so on. So it's not necessarily correct, but like some patterns sometimes exist. So those articles which were interesting for you by reading the title, so from them you could be getting those good practices and using it in your research. Yeah, so all this was more about what should be done before writing the paper. So probably the most important is raise your goal for the publication, what you want to achieve with it. So what's the purpose? What are the research questions? Do the homework. So usually homework is conceptualization of the paper. What I mean, usually it will be reading similar articles, finding where's the gap and where will be your unique niche, what you will be doing, where will be the novelty contribution, things like this. And also just plan the process. But the better you will plan, the bigger chance you will achieve the results on time and with some, I don't know, loss of results and so on. Yeah, and the second part, as I mentioned, will be more about the structure of the article. So also, it's not necessary to follow those, but why I'm talking about structure and about frameworks, as I mentioned, science publications becoming a business. And in most of the cases, you have an editor. The editor looks at the publication and decides to review it or no. And then you have reviewers, and reviewers are looking at it. So if the article has a very different structure, different approach, sometimes it could be an advantage because it's showing your creativity, things like this. But in most of the cases, people do not have time and they are trying to do as fast as possible. So then they are quickly looking at the paper and checking, oh, there is introduction, there is a methodology, the related works are analyzed, all references are not old enough, the methodology is clear because they are using some images, there are some explanations, the results are presented clearly with some numbers, deviations, so probably it's, and also there is conclusions, everything is fine, so probably it's good. If you are looking into the paper and you see there is, for example, related works, and then automatically results. You understand, like, okay, how comes the event to results? There is missing something. So I even do not investigate it in deep, and I will say, like, yeah, it do not have enough elements in it and so on. And even sometimes reviewers are referencing to some frameworks, best practices by saying, like, no, you should be following these recommendations and the paper will be of a better quality, something like this. So before I was mentioning, when you start writing, before starting, you should have the research question and already thinking about the answer and conclusion, how you will go to it. So when you are starting writing, you should be fulfilling between those two. So in the beginning, it was research question, then answer. Now we should have those two elements. One is methodology and another is result analysis. So this is why the framework, so framework, calling it framework is very soundly, but the main idea is you always should be following the same structure. There goes introduction, there goes methodology, there goes result analysis, and there goes the discussion. So it's a really simple framework just to have those four elements. And one element is not visible here because related work analysis is a must for all articles. Sometimes it will be inside of the introduction. It's not so common, but it exists. Like introduction defines what is the problem, what's the related work analysis is, like to highlight the gap, and all this then they are going to the research question. Sometimes introduction will be smaller, and then a second chapter after the related work will be after the introduction will be related work. Sometimes related work will be in the end, because why it's needed, like when you will be presenting your results, you will be comparing it with other results. So you need to review what already exists to highlight your novelty. So the structure, is it in the beginning, in the end? It could be different. It depends how you will structurize it, but it should be somewhere. But usually you will present first the introduction, only then methodology, only then results. And also sometimes discussion will be inside of the result analysis, but now it's more common to have either conclusions or discussion section in the end, like a summarizing, and this one as a more separate, just presenting your results, your solution. And probably you will ask, like, so where should be your novelty? In which part? Because it shows methodology, result. So if you proposed a new model or new solution, where it should be listed. So it also depends. Maybe your methodology is a little bit different. You are using something different. Maybe in the result not necessarily have to be result of the experiments. It could be like showing what kind of solutions exist and then presenting yours and explaining how yours are different. So also it depends on what you are writing, what's the purpose, what's the question which you are solving. So it might be in different places, but there should be something what's yours, because one of the most common review comments is, you should be more clearly defining what's the contribution, what's the novelty in this article. So usually they are expecting it in the introduction, somewhere in the body, and it should be reflected also in the discussion. And there are some illustrations from different sources which also explains what could go in science. So for example, there is one which says, like in introduction, there should be context, research gap, aim of the study. Another also says, like, yeah, even it adds, like, in the beginning there will be abstract, then in the introduction we will have those parts. Why I like this one? Because also it has not just a list what goes after what, but as I mentioned, sometimes it could be a different order. What's your interpretation? What means the white of the block? Why this one is more narrow, this one is more wide? No. Introduction shouldn't be the biggest section. Usually it's just about 1 page. Actually, it should be not based on how many words or pages it takes. It should be more on how narrow or broad the text is from the perspective, for example, if my research is on, fuel composition effect on green, on emission, something like this. So I shouldn't be starting exactly from this and this mix of fuel is more emitting more dangerous materials than this one. Probably I will start from more broader context. I will say nowadays the green energy is very relevant because of blah, blah, blah. So I'm starting from a little bit further and then I'm narrowing down. So it represents like introduction, starts with a problem, with a relevance, then with the problem, but like we are getting from more abstract problem, narrowing down. In the literature review also, I won't find exactly the same papers as mine. It will be similar but a little bit broader and a little bit different. So I'm just narrowing down by selecting the most suitable, and then I'm working on my area. So this one means like it's my specific area, and with the conclusions, also with the discussions. I'm starting with my result, but I should be always also explaining what bigger impact it has to a wider area. So if I estimated gasoline mixed with this one is emitting, I don't know, some kind of amount of CO2, and this one is emitting this amount. So later in the discussion, I should be explaining, so what kind of an impact it could have. Like if, I don't know, I just selected this one, but I do not know anything about petrol and the mixture, but it will be like from my results, how more applicable it could be. So this is why also in the beginning, I started from more abstract, narrowing down methodology and results is my specific area. With discussion, also I'm going a little bit further while I'm getting the conclusions. So this helps me also sometimes to understand like where to start. But you shouldn't be starting in Lithuania. We have an expression from Adam and Eve. Like, no, I shouldn't explain like the petrol was invented in blah, 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 and something like this. It should be close, but not exactly like in this specific something like this, because it will complicate the highlight of the problem and impact. So you are starting from a little bit further. Yeah, and it shows here like abstract. Also, as you see, the white should be more or less compatible with your methodology and results because it should shortly summarize what you are presenting it. And abstract is also kind of irrelevant because you are selling your article. So someone will read it and based on the abstract will decide to read further or no. Or sometimes even some students are lazy and they are reading just abstract and conclusions, and based on it, they are building the literature review. So this one should be highlighting the main ideas, but it shouldn't be too detailed to present everything, because if I will read everything in the abstract, why should I read the paper? And I like this image because it says, if I have a goal only, I won't achieve it. If I have a system only, also I have just a system, but I don't know what to achieve. So I should be having both goal and system. And also it says like with the abstract, there is some kind of similar idea. First of all, you are probably presenting the problem and research question just to say you have a goal. Like, yeah, I have this. You won't be writing like this, but like this problem exists. So we are learning how to solve, I don't know, the student drop out because every year government is losing this amount of money because of students who are starting and not finishing studies. And then you are presenting those two, like what kind of a methodology or solution you are presenting and what are the main findings. But also do not reveal everything, just the main ones. You should be leaving the intrigue, like, yeah, go inside and read it for them. So basically here, if it's just research, you're explaining also your novelty probably here, what was different. For example, maybe a new AI solution was proposed, which is able to achieve, I don't know, 99.98% of accuracy. And usually in the end, you are doing some kind of a practical conclusion by saying also what is the, as it says, like selling result, like why it's relevant to wider audience. So in this case, as I mentioned, this one would be more like a goal. This one would be more like a system, just to illustrate, like, yeah, you have both the goal and the system. And as I mentioned, the introduction usually has also some kind of a structure, similar a little bit to abstract, but a little bit more extended. So first of all, we are going with the important. So why the topic is relevant. So as I mentioned, more abstract, more wider area is usually more common when you are going to it. Then why it's important to demonstrate the relevance. Then usually you will identify what is the gap. So basically those three is very connected. Sometimes you will have just one sentence for all of them, because with the novelty you will be saying like, we are presenting new model which does something timely. It represents like if it's new, and sometimes it's related even with the importance of the topic. And contribution, it will be like what you are doing. So if it's not like what you are proposing, but just doing research, as I mentioned, but trying to investigate dependence between some factors. So it also could be your contribution. And in the end, it helps if you are showing you are doing it in a systematic way. So what it means, just usually there is a small paragraph explaining, like, in the first chapter, we are reviewing the existing papers and highlighting something was missing. In the second chapter, we will present the methodology. So just a very, very short structure of what is the structure of the paper. And as I mentioned, literature review is basically very important, and it could be presented in different places. But why it's needed, you won't know what is a research gap if you won't do literature analysis. So sometimes, as I mentioned, even you could do a review paper if you did a really systematic literature analysis. And what's tricky with it, okay, if I will tell in the paper, I selected 50 papers related to, I don't know, phishing attacks, and I analyzed what exists. Will you believe me? I selected really correct papers. What evidences I provided, I really looked at all relevant, and only those 50 were the most suitable for me. You do not know. Maybe I just selected random ones. Maybe the first 15, but it's not 50, but it's not suitable. So if you will present, you did it in a systematic way, it will have a bigger value. So one of the options is, for example, sometimes reviewers are mentioning like you should be using Prisma to framework to represent how the literature analysis was done. And basically, the Prisma framework also is very simple solution. Just I will show to you what you can find. Sorry. So in the website here, you could go with the flow diagram. You will see it's not very relevant, but nothing drastically is changing here. And I downloaded the first one, if I remember correctly. Just a minute. Oh, it would be better not to show you my files, but is here. Just a minute, I have it here. So Prisma, what it does, It just proposes this flow diagram, which you can use in your paper. So, for example, you will present, you identified the existing sources. So it goes here. And even presenting in numbers, it has some kind of a convincing effect, because then I would show like, okay, I found it based on those keywords. I looked in those databases. In total, there were, I don't know, 5 databases. I selected 1,000 of suitable papers. So this one was, for example, the identification, what exists. Also, you could extend. This one is just the main framework. You could do your novelty, even could be a little bit different approach to the systematic analysis, but it might be difficult to achieve because already some exist. So you could be doing like, you are looking into the keywords in this one, and then looking what kind of a papers they were referencing or whom was referencing those. And finally, you got a final list of keywords or articles which you will be further analyzing. Then there goes the screening phase. For example, record screen it. So it will be like you filter it based on your requirements, like it should match those and so on. So automatically you will be saying, okay, we excluded this amount. After screening, you did, for example, sort of retrieval. Also, you excluded some. After this step, also so you can even change a little bit this one, as I mentioned, adjust the Prisma framework based on your needs, but you will illustrate you had a systematic approach. You did everything to make sure you included all relevant articles and all of them were studied. So finally, you will get this amount, and in the review paper, you will analyze those. So by using such an approach, automatically you are more convincing. You are convincing I did everything correctly, and those are the most relevant, which I'm analyzing. And as I mentioned, it adds a visualization, so it's not so boring just to read the paper without understanding how it was done. Yeah, and another thing, like, okay, you had 1,000 or even more articles, how to structurize it and how finally to write the text. So you can use some traditional approaches. For example, Mendeley, probably today they were mentioning about it. So some systems exist. For example, when I was in a PhD studies, I was just using Excel file. I was writing each article as a row, and I added separate columns for myself, what was relevant to me. For example, in the beginning, I have it here. So what usually are the most relevant things which you are starting from, because you can use it in the article. So who's the author? What's the purpose? What's the theoretical perspective? What kind of different things which are relevant to your topic. And while I was reading, I found it out like, okay, for me, additionally, I want to know what kind of a data set they used or what kind of a age of students they analyzed. So I was dynamically adding additional columns and revising those previous papers just to make sure I have all information about all of them. Now you can use some existing tools already, like it's not necessary to store everything in your system. You can do a search. Those tools will be aggregating everything and even will be doing some kind of analysis instead of you to cluster it to represent it in more, I don't know, suitable form for understanding. So there is just one of the recommendations, what kind of AI usually based tools you can use. So you can use PubMed or Google Scholar for and Elicit for the article search. So for example, with the Elicit, from time to time I'm using it, but I'm using for the purpose not just to write the literature review, but just to structurize and find it. So the free of charge version has a limitations. It won't include all papers, but what it does, it searches for papers relevant to your keyword. It analyzes it. In the previous version, it was allowing for you to select what kind of a columns you want to include. Now even it decides instead of you what are the relevant columns, and sometimes even divides your related works into several groups, like, and separately presents, and then describes each of it in a table and also in a short text. So as I mentioned, you shouldn't be taking it and copying it, but looking at it, it can help you to understand what's happening. Also helping to understand what as the knowledge map, like how the articles are related and so on, those tools could be used. For example, Research Rabbit, it shows some kind of a graph. Like if you know this article is very similar to what I need to, like what I'm envisioning to do, automatically from this one, it will be showing like this article is referencing to those papers, and this one is referenced by those papers. So you will see like if it was referenced by those, so probably those are also relevant. Even it can show it in some kind of a time frame, so you can analyze how the topic was. It can show you similar articles, things like this. So basically, what's the main idea with the literature analysis and using some of those tools? You should be clustering it into some categories, because when you are presenting the text, maybe I have it for the, okay, I will come back to it. So the worst thing what you can do to write one paragraph for each source. So one article, one paragraph, another article, another paragraph. And usually the simplest approach is chronologically, like starting from the oldest one to the last one articles. But it do not reflect you have the skills to analyze, to group, and to write all the information. So usually the schema should be like you are searching, then summarizing, defining the arguments. So you should find some backbone, what's relevant between those, what I should be highlighting was common or different. Then detail the arguments which you will be using, and only then writing it into one sequence, like your results. So when you are writing the related work part or even article, what the reader is expecting. They want to find all the relevant articles, yeah, like from the content, but at the same time, they are looking what kind of capabilities you have. So you should be demonstrating you are able to summarize. So it shouldn't be just all articles, as I mentioned, one by one. You should be aggregating and presenting it in a more structured way. Then you should be able to synthesize it. So it should be like, I like the example, like when you are listing, for example, it would be this author used this and this approach to analyze this data. This author used this approach to analyze this data. So it's very boring to read, like who used what method, what data, and so on. But if you will do something, most of the authors use this data set, and you are adding references what were the authors, but just some of them also listing what highlighted the importance of this data. In most of the cases, the authors, like, or even mentioning like 20% of the cases, we're using this tool. So automatically it shows like you are summarizing, not listing all of them, and also synthesizing, providing the links, like this author mentioned this one but didn't include this aspect. Meanwhile, this added the aspect but forgot about this one. And this article, for example, included everything what is needed, but I don't know, the scope was limited to this one. So basically, you should be doing all those four things: summarize, synthesize, critiques is important. What I mean by critics, it shouldn't be like this article is good, this article is bad, but as I mentioned, like lacking this one, not taking into account this one, because it will help you to highlight what is the research gap. This one had this gap, this one had this gap, and now finally we do not have this. And also compare, so it's related to this one as well. So, and in all of the cases when you will make some kind of a statement, either you should provide a reference or you should be providing your research results. So basically what I mean, like references in the end should be mentioned only those who were cited, referenced, and those should be used to confirm your statements and to highlight what are the relevances, what are the gaps, and so on. Yeah, and for the literature review, like some kind of a do's and don'ts. So probably I won't go through all of those, but yeah, more or less it says the same. Like link every statement or opinion with a source. Like cite, it shouldn't be like you are stating something. If you are stating like the best method is SVM, why? Where? It depends. Like recently we were discussing, like if you will ask, I don't know, some kind of farmer which method in in artificial intelligence, which politic party is the best? Probably he will have a very clear answer, this one or this one, but he's not an expert. If you will ask a politician which party is the best, probably he won't have answer yes, no. He will have, like we are seeing, like different shades, like this one has this good example, this one that. So similar happens with this one. When you are stating something, you should provide the source, because the source stated like this and under those conditions, not like always on something like this. So in this case, you are just highlighting, who confirmed it, who stated like this, and can justify it, not just by saying it by yourself. Yeah, it says like starting with paragraph with a source, but not necessary. Sometimes it could be in the end, but anyways, it shouldn't be like this one like this, that one like this. It should be some kind of mix, clear transfer from one to another. And it says like include in each section, use your voice. So the main idea is like, it shouldn't be just like summary statistics. There should be some kind of a justification, but it doesn't mean it should be, I believe this one is the most suitable. You should be saying like, based on the analysis, this solution is more appropriate because something like, you are making decisions, but usually you are referring to something to justify. So this is why basically the literature analysis review is kind of important, because it gives you the justification, gives you understanding. One more thing, it's probably not listed here, but from the literature analysis, you should be building the understanding of your approach, what's already done, how you should be doing. Maybe the methodology should be duplicated, like use the same metrics for comparison, just something new added. And as I mentioned, the next section is methodology. And this image says like, usually when you are doing something, for example, your PhD thesis, you are working hard, let's assume 90%, and the result is just 10% in best scenario. And when you are writing an article, you are dedicating all the attention to results and just a small part for the methodology. So it's kind of not fair in your case, because you did some work and it's not visible. And actually, it's not very fair to the reader, because the article, the research should be reproducible. So it means I should be reading and understanding how it was done, how it was achieved, what kind of data was used, and so on and so on. So you should be dedicating enough attention to the methodology to explain how you did the research, what metrics were used, and so on. And there is some kind of a guidelines, what could be added in the methodology section. It depends on each area and so on, specific of the topic, but usually it's like what kind of participants data or case. So basically what you are analyzing. If you are using, for example, AI models, so what kind of a data sets you integrated. If you are doing, I don't know, survey with some persons, so who was your participants? How many of them you had? In what time frame you were asking the opinion, and so on. So then there goes the design, how you design and the group. And also I was mentioning like, there was one project proposal and they were saying like, they will test teachers, students' knowledge in, let's say, phishing attack. Then they will do some training, and then they will do another test for student knowledge on phishing attack. Is it a suitable research method or no? Because it will be like difference. I will measure what are the results of the teacher. I mentioned usually the goal is it should be measurable and it should be oriented on some different shift. So it seems like everything is fine. I'm measuring, I'm doing before, after, in the middle, I'm doing something. But there is some tricky part in this case. So before the lecture, if I would be giving you a test about this topic, probably you would know less than after the lecture. So automatically, I already know the result. After the lecture, you will know more. How more? I'm not sure. It depends on different factors. So probably my research should be oriented on such a thing like dividing you in different groups. And then for one group, maybe I will use one approach for teaching. For another group, I will be using another approach. And then I will be comparing those approaches, which is more suitable, which one is allowing me to get better results and so on. If I'm just testing with one test case, it's like, okay, and what is it for it? Who affected it? Was it the teacher? Was it the material? Was it so? This is why with the methodology section, you are justifying, is your research use suitable? How you measured it? Is it trusted and so on? Also, what kind of materials and tools you used? So basically, if you did some analysis, so maybe you can list what tools you used for data analytics. If you used some AI models, you can specify what tools, what, for example, models were used for one task or another, just to make sure someone could repeat it and get similar results. Also about procedures, how it was done, how the data analysis was done. So those are them commonly used, but as I mentioned, not necessary. There might be some specific ones taking into account your research topic or the journal. And with the results, sometimes results section is this dedicated both for presenting results and also for discussion. But in most of the cases, it will be just separate for the results and separate for discussion. So this one is just you're presenting your results in figures, tables, something like this. So it depends on your research, but usually it's just all the results which are needed to understand what you achieve. And it was even mentioning here, like, do not try to use just mean because it says nothing. Add standard deviation, other metrics, just to make sure there is a full view to understand what are the variations and so on. And after the result, then goes the discussion. So with the discussion, you should be analyzing the results and deriving some conclusions, saying why it's very relevant, what it means in practice, what are the limitations and so on. So the structure of this part usually could be, first of all, it goes some kind of a summary, like you are reflecting. So it just says like there should be some link with the research question, with the introduction. If you told your aim is to increase accuracy, so it means in discussion, you should be analyzing and seeing. So basically, if we are looking like this, like I created a new model and my purpose was to increase the accuracy. So in the result, I just provided some tables illustrating how different parameters or something affected it. Here, probably I will remind, like, I achieved this accuracy, and in previous work, the maximum accuracy was this one. I achieved with this method, and they achieved with this one, and so on. And there are two types of other elements. Some are convincing. Convincing means you are adding something to convince the reader, yes, the results are valuable and your competences are good. And value when you are saying what are the results which could be used further. So with the convincing, it should be interpretation. Are you able to interpret the results? So as I mentioned, once we did the research, we just tried different models, and we found that the best model is KNN, which is looking at the nearest neighbors. But the best result was achieved, I don't remember, with one or with two nearest neighbors. So it means basically, yeah, we got a better result, but it's very limited. It just found the most suitable person and just sticks to it. So like addressing it, like clearly interpreting the data, you will demonstrate you are good on the data analysis, you understand what are the possible applications, limitations. Yeah, and limitations are going even here, like you should be providing. Is it applicable in all situations or just in this one? With value, you could do like, what is the integration, like how it fits to the existing research. So if it's possible, you should be comparing with other research. Like as I mentioned, they achieved 98 and we achieved 99. And they help the statistics, which I explained in the first lecture. If I will say like they achieved 98 and I 99, is it increase or no? On paper, yes. But if you will go deeper into statistics and will analyze the standard deviations, then you could use some statistic methods to estimate, is it statistically significant or no? And then you will be able to say like, yeah, on absolute, like on an average value, mean value, we achieve a higher result, but it's still in the error range. So we are not achieving better result. And later I will have a slide about it. Sometimes achieving no result. So I was planning to increase accuracy, but I didn't. So it's still a result. It just shows this approach is not able to achieve a better result. But in reality, usually paper will say like, so what, why should you publishing it? So sometimes after getting the result, probably you will need to adjust your introduction and change a little bit your objective. So for example, maybe previously my objective was to increase the accuracy. If I understood I'm not able to increase the accuracy, maybe I could shift and say like, to keep the same accuracy while decreasing the need of resources. Maybe my model is simpler, it do not require so much computational power, things like this. So it means my objective could be shifted and I'm then. So this is why like analysis help you to highlight where are your strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, and also you could have some conclusions like implications and conclusions here. And as I mentioned with the, okay, it's first about the objective estimation. So as I mentioned, like no result is also a result, just a question how you will present it. And maybe you will be able to find the dimension which is novel. With the limitations also, it shouldn't be just criticizing your article in the end, but it should list like it works under those conditions or only with the scores. For example, also we did one research trying to identify did student use Gen AI tools or no while answering. And we compare like when students were writing answers by themselves and while the answers were generated. But we tested it just with one course, just about AI. So we cannot tell this approach is suitable for social science, humanities, physics, and so on. We tested just with this one. So admitting the limitations is a good thing because you are kind of a safe. You are saying, yeah, with this data set, it works. We are not responsible what will happen with another data set, with another situation, and so on. And also, when you are listing those limitations, sometimes it helps you to identify what could be the mitigation plan. So basically, sometimes you should be providing evidence you did everything what was possible to avoid some flaws in the research, in the data. But yeah, we face this limitation. Sometimes after seeing it, maybe you will come like repeat the experiment with some other elements. And talking about conclusions, so usually there is an issue because in most of the cases, students are just presenting some summary. The accuracy was like this. The answers on average was like this. And conclusions should be conclusions. So they should derive some new knowledge. So I like this example by saying like it should have three parts. What was done and what results was achieved, what conclusions could be made from it, and how you justify this conclusion. So in Lithuanian, we have some kind of an anecdote, and it says like, I won't tell it all, but I like the example because the example is, I'm stating, grandma took the newspaper. I told the result, but it says nothing. So the conclusion would be, she will be going to the toilet. But without the third part, how I made this conclusion, I don't have. So I just need to finalize it by saying because she's not reading anymore, she cannot see something like this. So automatically, the only approach why she took the paper is going to the toilet. So something similar should be done with your results. Like after executing experiment, we receive that 90% of Vilnius Tech students are vulnerable to phishing attack. So it's just a statement about the results. So what? What's the conclusion? What could I say about it? So I could, taking into account what else I know or what else I present in this article, for example, maybe I could conclude, so this means the university is not safe against phishing attacks because each student is a vulnerable vector and the university system security could be breached by students. Or if I provided some additional evidence before, maybe I could do it in different way. Despite the 90% credulity of students to phishing attacks, university is still safe because students do not have access to any critical infrastructure. with those logins. So it just depends on you, but it's like based on your research result, what kind of a conclusion you could do. And sometimes I'm explaining like what is the conclusion. It's something what's relevant to ours. If you got 80% of accuracy, so what it means? Then you should be explaining why it's important. So this means, and also I was telling to Lithuanian students, sometimes words help you to convince the reader, the reviewer. So for example, as I mentioned in the objective, if it will be increase, decrease, something like this, so it shows like shift and measurable. So with conclusions, if you will be using some wording like, in conclusion, we can state, it shows that. So automatically when I'm seeing terms like this, I'm thinking, oh, it shows that, so it means they made some kind of a conclusion and now they are presenting it based on the results. And also with the conclusion, sometimes you could add even the future work. It's kind of a useful because you show like, yes, this topic is still relevant. There is plenty of ways how you can continue the research, and we even have a plan. So it's usually recommended, but not always necessary. And also some articles could add acknowledgement, even PhD thesis, you can add acknowledgement. So acknowledgement is what you are mentioning, who wasn't co-authors, but to whom you would like to thank. So for example, if you, I don't know, include some school and you ask the teachers to do something, so you could add acknowledgement to the school, like, we thank you, this school, because they contributed to the research. They are not authors, co-authors of the article, but they had an impact. Or I don't know, some other things. Usually in PhD thesis, students are thanking the family because they were very patient and allowed me to finish. But it's not necessary. For example, I deleted acknowledgement at all because I was thinking if I will mention one person, now I will be angry. So how to select? So references are necessary in all cases. So as I mentioned, those should be mentioned, which were mentioned in the article text, and you can add annexes. Some journals are requesting even like data, code, if it was used, different things. And also if you have big tables with all the data, it's relevant to present the data, but it's better to add to the annex and add reference rather than adding it to the body of the article. And just summarizing what I was mentioning about writing more about the structure of the article, yeah, like using systematical literature review is very useful for yourself to understand the gap, to understand the wording, the structure, what already exists, things like this. And also you should be trying to mimic the structure of similar papers, even finding out what kind of a metrics they use, because if you will be using different metrics, you won't be able to compare the results, things like this. But those best practices can be a little bit different based on different areas, different journals. So when you will decide you want to publish in one or another journal, just read, usually there are some templates or checklists, what should be taken into account. And one of the best practices is just do some reviews of papers, because probably if you won't start, like, who will be sending you to review a paper? One of the chances maybe your supervisor will, because for example, even for me, my supervisor was giving some articles by saying, this one is very similar to yours, read, maybe you will have some, and at the same time write a review, because when you are writing, you are forced to read deeper to analyze what's happening. And there is one opinion, like, as I mentioned, sometimes journal review takes about 1 year. So they are saying journals and reviewers intentionally not hurrying up, and they are delaying your article review because they copied your idea and now they are writing another paper. So in reality, usually it's not happening, or probably very rarely. But one of the chances what you can do, because as I mentioned, if it's taking too long, you could publish in some open repositories. Like, yeah, I prepared the article on this date, just it was reviewed a long time ago, and I still will have them confirmation it was here. For example, archive system is used, but then it becomes tricky because some journals are open access. So then you are paying the article processing charge. So they usually do not mind, it will be somewhere. But if it's not open, so it means you are not paying for the article processing charge, but the publisher later gets money for access to yours. So if your article will be somewhere available online, they won't be happy. And probably because of it, they could reject it and so on. So there might be some tricky situations. And also just one more comment, because I remembered regarding the references, which I mentioned here. Even in our practice, once we receive such a situation, I mentioned like sometimes it's a good thing to reference to some papers in the journal which you are submitting. But from the reviewer, we got a review and he was listing, you didn't listed all the necessary relevant articles. And there is a list about 20 articles and all of them had one author in common. We instantly understood, yeah, it's the reviewer. He just wants us to cite him. Automatically by it, he will be increasing the H-index and things like this. And we were thinking what to do. So what to do in such a situation? Reviewer asks you to add some relevant papers. He says it's relevant. You see, not all of them are relevant, and all of them belong to one author. Our approach was like, we shouldn't be adding it. But if we will tell the editor will say like, okay, we are discarding this review and we will need to wait for another reviewer, because usually it's about 2 or 3 reviewers for each article. And we decided we would like to publish it now. So instead of 20, we selected 2 or 3 papers, which was the most relevant, and we cited them. Not all of them, but some of them. And then we submitted it and got back from the editor by saying, sorry, but we found it out. The reviewer wasn't honest and he was adding his references for you and you added it. So now we are discarding both of the reviews and we are starting the process from over again. So in trying to be more fast, finally we were waiting longer. So sometimes, at least my conclusion from this one was, it makes sense to be fair and report the editor if you see the reviewer has some hidden intentions behind the review. Yeah, and talking about the last part, it will be a short one, about the text. So basically, yeah, academic writing has some kind of a style. So you already know you wrote the master thesis. So the main things are, it should be structured, like your thoughts shouldn't be jumping from one to another. You should have some kind of a logical flow. And this should be flow from one section to another, like why you are seeing like this. Also, you should be providing evidence. So either arguments, as I mentioned, provided by linking to some reference or to your results or to some kind of a theories and something like this. You should use a critical voice, like evaluating the result. You should be precise. You should be balancing, avoiding the biases and so on, objective and formal. So we sometimes are joking like in social media, they're trying to use nice language and so on. In research papers, usually you are kind of a strict, direct, short. So the text is probably kind of a readable for the person who understands the terminology, but it's not very flowy, just like this, that, and so on. And some recommendations like, yeah, you shouldn't be trying to write a really long article. And it's a little bit tricky because I remember my PhD studies, and in the beginning I was writing at least 10 pages and my supervisor was saying like, no, it's too much, narrow down, until 5 pages. After some time, he started saying like, okay, now it's time to write longer articles. And I was like, how come? You were saying I should be narrowing down. And he was like, no, not a text. Text should be just the main information. No one needs to read it, I don't know, 5 times in different positions of the article about the same thing, how you selected one method or another. But he meant like longer paper, like doing a bigger research which has multiple parts in it. So just integrating more content in the article rather than presenting one aspect and something like this. So the text still is like kind of a short and concrete, using the structure which is required, and as I mentioned, using the common structure is easier for the reviewer for the reading. Also using the appropriate terminology. So what I mean by this, when you will be reading relevant articles, you will find how they are calling one thing on another. For example, I know I'm thinking something, have no idea now, but basically, like if there is terminology for what you are doing, you should be using. But when I was in master studies, one of the professors was saying, when I was trying to write an article, he was saying like, you should be trying to use as much as possible clever words. This is how you will convince you are an expert. But my opinion then, and even in PhD thesis, my supervisor confirmed like, no, you should be writing clearly to make sure that people will understand. But it has two sides, because just imagine you are a reviewer and you are reading, everything is clear, everything you understand, you found it, all the necessary structure elements, all the results. So it's good, like it's not using some fancy words, but all the results are here. But if you will be reading a paper where, I don't know, 20% of the words are not known to you, and it uses some strange expressions in, I don't know, and something like this. So what are the possible outcomes? What you will be thinking? If you trust in yourself, you will be saying, it's not readable, it's difficult to understand, you should be rewriting it. If you are doubting yourself a little bit, you will be thinking, probably he knows what he's writing. Probably I'm the one who do not understand, and probably everything is correct. So sometimes it works when you add some fancy words and you are mentioning some novel methods and I don't know, frameworks and so on. But you shouldn't be overplaying with it, because then it just becomes a bunch of fancy words with no result inside of it. Also, it should be always truth. So nowadays, what kind of a issue we are facing? Some students are generating text. And sometimes the GenAI tools even generating fake articles. So if you would be reviewer, if you would find one of the references is fake, so the reference is not leading to any existing article, it's just made up. So would you trust the research if at least one paper like this was found? No, then you would have some doubts. Maybe he generated all the article, maybe the other references are also generated. So this is why you should be some kind of a precise and trying to assure the accuracy, trusted results in all elements. If at least in one place there will be some doubts, it might raise some concerns. Also, like the last probably week, I got a PhD thesis text from my PhD student, and she was providing a table. There was some accuracies, and one of the methods was saying like the accuracy is 98%, the precision, recall, and F-score is 0. By understanding it cannot happen like this, and I saw just one line was incorrect, automatically I know either she forgot to write the numbers or she's faking the data. So then I'm starting doubting all the section, and I'm asking like how you achieve the number, where is the evidence, and so on. So this is why, as I mentioned, be specific and check all the facts. You can use some tools. Even now, some articles are providing some check boxes or some sections to present where you use GenAI tools. For example, maybe you used for text editing and styling. Maybe you used for data augmentation. There is even a taxonomy where you can use it. So it's important to state it and make sure everything is clear. But finally, you are responsible for it. Yeah, talking about the past and present tense, so it's tricky. It might depend on the area, journal, and so on. But there are some common recommendations, like when you are talking about previous published works. So it's not necessary to use the past tense, like because still the results are relevant. They didn't disappear. When you are talking about your results, like what you achieved, if you will be talking now we are achieving, it sounds strange, like no, you are saying what you did. So sometimes it could be some kind of a mix between past and present tense, and there is one source with the recommendations where to use what. So they are listing some information But the main idea also, it's not just about past or present. Sometimes it's, should I write without, yeah, now my English is bad. I don't remember how it's called. Like, should I write an article or in PhD thesis? Let's make this one better. Like, I use this method to achieve something. Could I use, we use this methods? What should I be writing? Yeah, at least I believe the best approach is just to use no personalization, no, neither I nor we nor they, just like this research showed, or the results we achieved by blah blah blah, something. I'm not saying I am not saying we. If you need to say I, like, or we, it's better to use we, even if it's just you. But it's also just my opinion. But recently, with some PhD thesis, it was like some reviewers were saying, "Why you are writing we? You did that PhD thesis," and we were discussing like, is it really I? I had a supervisor, I had some consultation, so it's tricky. So it's better to use neither I nor we. Just, I don't know how it's called. Yeah. Yeah, and talking about this one, so yeah, mimicking terminology helps you to show you know the area. You know how those metrics are called, how those, I don't know, methods or something is called. It's not like that thing with whom we are writing on the table. Like, no, I'm saying like chartboard or something like this. But you shouldn't be using it too often just to illustrate, yeah, I know the fancy words and something like this. And in most of the cases, it will help if you will be reading some articles in the journal to understand the structure, the language, and so on. The more you read, like the more examples you have, and you can select the best practices, the patterns which apply to your study. Yeah, and every time when you are writing, just assume you are writing to person who is busy. So he or she do not want to read all those irrelevant elements, read it multiple times and so on. And it's better to structurize, provide some visualizations instead. Then the reader will be happy. So if the reviewer will be happy, probably the review won't be so strict and so on. And yeah, for the end, what I had, so it was like, as I mentioned, the objectives was for you to understand the requirements for scientific papers and to be able to apply and to be able to review. So those two I cannot evaluate now. For those, it's just like, it's not necessary to do, but we can play like, for good scientific paper, is it better to focus on a specific question or questions, or to cover a broader spectrum of problems and questions? What? Yeah, like if it will be more specific, you will convince, like, I know this area. If you will be trying to cover a lot, probably you will lose the accent. Sometimes it's relevant, like, to have a broader, like, when I'm doing literature review, like review paper, I need to cover huge amount of papers, but still they should have a common backbone. What I'm trying to identify, what is the gap? Abstract tables and figures are understandable without reading wallpaper, or abstract tables and figures are understandable only with reading wallpaper. Like, because each table figure should be explained in the text. It's a must. If you are not mentioning it, so it means it's not necessary. So A or B. Even if, yeah, even if I'm mentioning it and describing, it's a must. It should be self-understandable. Maybe you should add it in the title, not necessarily in the image, like what's happening, but you should be trying to structurize to make sure I'm looking and I understand. As we had the structure of this one. So the wide wasn't so understandable what it means. Is it specific? Is it broader? But if I would add it in the title, like this is the sequence where the white of the element illustrates. So then it would be more approachable. So it could be added, not necessarily even in the image. It's in its caption. Also, it's suitable. Writing. Okay, with this one, it's complicated. We will miss it. Then is it good to use always the same word, or try to use a different language? For example, if I was writing about how rose insects affecting, I don't know, the blooming or something like this. So always rose, 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 or rose, flower, something else. Because when we are reading social media posts, yeah, we try to make sure our language is very nice, productive. In scientific papers, no. Why no? Because then the reader starts doubting. So it was about rose, now it's about flower. So is it the same or no? Maybe it's a little bit different for flower. Maybe it's a little bit different for this one. So for the main, and it's also tricky. All those questions are not also so strictly separated. Sometimes it needs explanation. For your main objects, which you are mentioning, you should have a consistent terminology. But for your transition words, it's better to use different words. For example, my colleagues were joking, like they sometimes can recognize my text because I'm sticking to some words like however, meanwhile, at the same time, as well as, and they notice like, yeah, it's happening. But when I'm using those, I cannot use in my head, I cannot use however, this one was done like this, however, blah, blah, blah. I'm switching between them. Sometimes this one, sometimes that one. I'm not using the same words in a sequence twice. So it should be replaced by something else. So for those transition words, yeah, it's nice when you are switching to something, but for your object terminology, try to stick to the same term. Even sometimes students are adding abbreviation and the abbreviation is changing in the article. Like, no, if it's abbreviation, you are mentioning it in the first place and always using it in the same. So yeah, it's more or less about the same. Writing is flowery or writing is consistent. It's more important to have the consistency rather than nice, I don't know, flow, nice language, because scientific paper is oriented on content and on logic rather than text. Uh, yeah, so for summarizing what was here, so yeah, it's usually some kind of a difficult when you are starting writing paper. So just prepare, you will need to write, rewrite, submitting, getting rejection, submitting once again. And one of the stories which I have, like, I had a PhD student, but not from the first year. He was with another supervisor, and then he shifted. So he wrote the article by himself. And he was saying, like, should I write you as a co-author? And I was saying, like, no, you did it by yourself. So it's your contribution. I didn't contribute it. So you can submit it by yourself. Even I'm the supervisor currently. So he submitted and he got a reject. So then he was saying, I assume maybe they were rejecting me just because I do not have a PhD. So maybe I could include you. And still admitting, like, maybe no, I was saying, try once more time because it would be nice. It's fully yours. He tried the second one. Again, he was rejected. And the third time, like, he was like, can I? And I said, like, okay, I will revise. I will look. Basically, I changed nothing. Just he wrote me as a co-author, the second one, and then he was accepted. So it's not a good example, but sometimes it happens. And in previous university where I was working, my head of the department was saying, first of all, you are working for your name, then your name is working for you. So sometimes journals are doing things like this. They are, for example, sending viewers like some kind of a discount or even free of charge publishing in the journal. And I remember there was some period and I was like getting discount of 20% and my co-author was getting discount on 100%. And I was like, come on, both of us wrote in the same article and he is getting one discount, I'm getting another. Why? He had a higher H index. So automatically the journal is thinking like, this person is good on articles, so we want more papers from him. Then we will increase the citation of our journal. So sometimes it works. It's not a good example. Like, we shouldn't be playing like this, because even there are some examples like when a university professor is writing 50 articles per year. So one per week. Is it possible? It's probably difficult because writing article, yes, if you know what you are writing. For example, how I'm writing. First of all, I'm doing the brainstorming what I want to achieve, then doing the research, then walking about 1 week just thinking what I will write, how I will structurize, what I want to highlight, and then within 1 or 2 days, I'm writing the text, because when you know what you are writing, you are just writing. But it required research, it required the working. So 1 per week is kind of a complicated. So how it's happening, like the person is able to generate, write this amount of articles, he has a huge amount of co-authors. So maybe someday I was writing article with 2 of you. Another day you will be writing an article with 2 of us. So it's like extending the network. So why I'm telling all this, I'm not saying you should be cheating and doing all the stuff, but I'm saying networking helps. So what you could do, you could collaborate with some persons. You could include some researchers in your research, not just writing his or her name in your article, but just discussing, like, I have this idea and you are doing something similar. Maybe we could do together something. So it's tricky with PhD thesis, as I mentioned, because there cannot be like 5 students wrote 5 articles together. So each of them are defending probably just one, because the same article shouldn't be used. But in further career, it helps. Like, you have a network, you are collaborating. So while you are writing one article, someone is doing research. So it helps achieving better results. Probably someone already told you about what is citation, H-index, and how to increase it. So it's relevant. Yeah, what I missed, what should be answered? I was talking a lot, sorry. But it's a last lecture. So, okay, so then I will stop recording. Oh, where's my mouse? If you have any questions, don't hesitate and ask. And also, as I mentioned, like, if you will be